made about that book and its allegations. And again, it can be proved from documentary archive access. We need historians to go to work on it. If that's true, it's beyond scandalous. It's a conspiracy against all of us. World War One, and my Canadian soldiers that I nursed, we are very annoyed about this. This is scandalous. If the people pulling the strings behind the scenes, Sazonov interfering with that agent, were actually British, the elites of London, who thought it was in their financial interest to take out Germany. The argument presented by the Scottish historians is that the reason the Anglo-American elite sphere were doing World War One was to destroy Germany, which was regarded as a rival power and couldn't be allowed to succeed. Well, I suspend judgment. I'm sharing with you, if you haven't read this book, some of its contents. But the implications is that if the elite pulled off World War One, they're capable of anything. Doing Brexit is just a minor little thing. Let me just share another thing that some people, again, may not know. British intelligence also financed the rise of Mussolini and fascism as a bulwark against Bolshevism, as they saw it. Having engineered World War One, which led to Bolshevism, and an attempt by people to stop fighting, the Russian Revolution, whatever you think of it, one of its main slogans was peace and bread. Let's get out of World War One. The Russians just had had enough. And they found that the Bolsheviks were able to give them that direction of travel. Little did they realise, of course, that it would lead to Stalinism and jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. But that was partly because, the subsequent reaction and the Civil War, and the whole thing was a madness. But not only was that maybe triggered by the London elite, but so was fascism, the counterforce. And the facts of these, what I'm sharing now, are known by specialist historians. Historians working in the archives have discovered that the equivalent of what later became called MI6, British Foreign Intelligence, had an agent in Rome, Hoare, H-O-A-R-E, who was later became a Conservative MP, and he was in charge of Britain's intelligence in Rome during World War One, and he had money to spend for purposes, and he spotted Mussolini as a likely demagogue, leader, agent, and so he funded him to become basically an agent working in the employ of the British Secret Service. He would report, he would make regular bulletins back to London. This was kept from the British people and kept from the Italian people for decades. But Mussolini single-handedly, power-housed fascism into power in Italy. And I find it shocking, beyond words, that British intelligence would have actually colluded and participated in that. I suppose if you think about it, it's not that surprising that a conservative thinker like Hoare and his paymasters in London would have wanted to, create some sort of political force to rival communism. But I still find it shocking that, given the subsequent brutality of fascism, the way that it dealt with its opponents, and the way that it then went into a League of Alliance with the Nazis, and the horrors of World War II, and so on. Again, British intelligence helped engineer that. And that's a demonstrable fact. This is not just something made up. These are factual allegations that historians have discovered. So we live in a very strange world, don't we, where British intelligence can create fascism, can help engineer World War One. Of course it can engineer Brexit, but I think Brexit is the bridge too far. You see, what I think is extraordinary about the Anglo-American elite hubris is that because they're all, awash with Middle Eastern money and Saudi petrodollars and all the rest, they think they're literally beyond the reach of normal people like me, normal people like you, my viewers. And politicians and statesmen that have some, let's call it a romantic attachment to truth, as opposed to a nefarious attachment simply to power without principle. So I belong to that old-fashioned romantic school, you can call us liberals with a capital L, who actually believe in truth and honour and decency. And I'm shocked when I learned that my country might have been responsible for the outbreak of World War I, or might have been responsible for the outgrowth of Italian fascism, And I'm a romantic historian enough and a liberal to say, well, let's find the truth. Let's get the archives open. Let's have a commission of inquiry, even now, into these scandalous allegations. That's why I'm writing a book about 9/11, which is another scandalous, nefarious sequence of events that have been inflicted on the American and British and world community, with one version of events that seems to bear no reality in relation to truth. I'm one of those old-fashioned historians that's concerned with truth. Okay, so, and Brexit is another. The narrative is so contra to logic, contra to right reason, contra to ethics, that it's obviously a fake narrative constructed by these same elites. And I'm afraid I'm calling it it's time to wake up from that dream. Now, so what strategy is left to me? I'm simply a human being. I'm simply a philosopher. I'm simply an intellectual. Have no clout. Well, I can write letters. St. Paul was just a thinker, but he wrote letters. They're still quite important. We still study them. And the letter is still an important art form. So I have a history of writing letters. I'm about to publish the first volume of my collected letters. I hope some people will enjoy reading it. I've been writing to people of influence since I set up the Institute in 1991 at the University of London. And even before that, when I set up Philosophers and Historians for Peace back in '84 with my colleague John Francis Phipps in London. So I believe in the power of the pen. It is mightier than the sword. Now, the last couple of letters I wrote to the Prime Minister, she hasn't been replying in a very intelligent or meaningful way, I have to say. Theresa must be very busy trying to justify the ridiculous action that she's taking the country on. I've pointed out in letters to Theresa May that she has no mandate to implement any kind of Brexit, but absolutely not a hard Brexit. She is likely to be moving in the direction of breaking up the United Kingdom, etc., etc. I pointed out these common truths. And she started by replying reasonably politely, like, "Thank you, Dr. Daffern, I've read your letter. It's very interesting, I've passed it to the Foreign Secretary." That's the usual response you get from Downing Street. The most recent response I had was the least polite of all the responses. It was simply, "Dear Dr. Daffern, your letter has been received. Yours truly." So no comment, nothing, not even an attempt at a second sentence. It's like, it's very rude, that. And I thought, well, okay, you're being rude, Theresa. I'm not going to be rude back, but I am going to write to your line manager. Who's the line manager of the British Prime Minister? Is the Queen, the constitutional monarch, who ultimately is vested with the power and the duty of safeguarding the realm. Prime Ministers come and go. This Queen, Elizabeth, has seen Prime Ministers ever since Churchill come and go. She was Queen when Churchill was still Prime Minister. And so that's a lot of people she's had to deal with, both on the left, on the right, liberal types, whatever. She's a wise stateswoman. And I felt I had a constitutional duty to write to her and inform her that her country is in danger. I rang an alarm bell. And I'm going to share with you the letter that I wrote to her. Part of it, I won't read the whole thing. And I'm going to then share the reply I've had from Buckingham Palace. And then I'm going to comment on it. I think this is quite important, actually. And as I say, I have no power, no influence, apart from the power of the pen and the word. This is the letter I sent on the 28th of June in 2018, just a couple of months ago. Dear Queen Elizabeth II, and it's a matter of public record. This is not, this is not a secret thing I'm sharing, but it is a thing of import. Dear Queen Elizabeth II, I was born in 1956 in Canada, 3 years after you became Queen, and therefore have always lived under your sovereignty, as a loyal and devoted subject of your Majesty. I have no outer political power or office, and have never striven for such. I am merely a philosopher and intellectual, a Druid and an Anglican Christian who's always believed hitherto that you have abided by your oath of office when you became Queen, and that you have striven to do your best for your realms. I believe that you are a person of great integrity and realise the responsibilities that high office brings. I am writing to you in good faith, with the confidence and hope that this is truly so. Like many of your subjects, I was not an enthusiastic supporter of removing the UK from the European Union. The majority of your subjects, in fact, did not vote for this outcome in the referendum in 2016. Of all registered voters, only 72% actually voted, meaning that 28% didn't vote at all, for whatever reason. And an abstention is actually a vote for the status quo, which is to remain in the EU. Of those who did vote, 35% voted to remain in the EU, and only 36% voted to leave the EU. This means that 64% of the total voters registered to vote in your kingdom did not vote to leave the EU. The majority of voters of Scotland chose to remain in the EU. The great majority of British citizens now want a second referendum of this most vital of political questions. Why has this current government interpreted the referendum results as a mandate for an absolute Brexit? In my work as a political scientist and philosopher of peace over many years, teaching at both the Universities of London and Oxford, I've never known of such a fatal miscalculation. The immediate consequences of this policy will result in the citizens of Northern Ireland being given a referendum by choice to join with the Republic of Ireland and remain in the EU. All the demographics point to this as an almost certain outcome. Likewise, the people of Scotland will lawfully demand a second independence referendum, and this time will vote for becoming an independent nation state within the EU. Again, the implications of the Brexit policy are that the UK of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will have to be renamed Little Britain, England and Wales. As a loyal subject to your Majesty, I am utterly appalled and shocked at the short-sightedness of the conservative, ruling cabal in implementing a policy which is not a legal requirement, has no real actual popular support nationwide, and is going to result in the breakup of the UK. Have they completely lost their minds? It is my understanding that you have a constitutional duty as monarch to defend the integrity of your realm. Your Privy Councillors have a sworn duty to protect your Majesty from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I am writing to you not as a Privy Councillor, but as a loyal subject, to warn you of the impending danger which I foresee for your kingdom. I assure you that if you consult with any genuine academics, constitutional experts, legal advisors, political scientists, etc., they will also confirm that what I have written here is as true as anything ever can be when it comes to political science. If you are being told otherwise, the Scots will back down, the Northern Irish are not serious, etc., you are being misadvised by party political placemen lacking in a fundamental overview of the situation. Melbourne was appreciated by Queen Victoria as a great Liberal Prime Minister, precisely because he told her the truth, not because he told her what she wanted to hear. We seem to be lacking statesmen and stateswomen of his calibre nowadays. So that was the essence of my letter to the Queen, and just a couple of footnotes to that. Yeah, I mean, obviously the tone is deferential, but I think that's appropriate. You know, this is just a nobody writing to the Queen of a very important Commonwealth of Nations. When I was trained as a nursing orderly in Canada in the Veterans Hospital I talked of, I had to swear an oath of loyalty to the Queen. It was like being inducted into a kind of because I learned lots of military type secrets. I might learn them in the hospital working with old soldiers. So I've never broken that oath. You know, when I say I'm a loyal subject, I mean it. But I have a duty, therefore, simply as a normal chap, to point out what is so obvious. I think most people in Canada, most people throughout the Commonwealth are utterly appalled at Brexit. I was very good friends with lots of Canadian Scots. We don't want Britain to break up, which is what's going to happen. You know, what on earth is the advantage of tearing up and destabilising the country, and the consequence for Europe as well? It destabilises fellow European nations that are trading with Britain, European citizens who've gone to live in England or Britain and enjoy it there, have intermarried, put their children in school. There's been a lot of cultural toing and froing, which I think is wonderful. All about to be ruptured, and for what possible gain? The destruction of the UK. So this is why I say in my paragraph, I'm appalled at the short-sightedness of the conservative, sick ruling cabal in implementing a policy which is not a legal requirement. Sick, I'm saying, they call themselves conservatives, but a conservative is someone that tries to conserve what is good in a society. I always think that conservative is like Vishnu trying to retain the all that's best in life, and true conservatism is, as they say in Canada, a progressive force, because it's trying to preserve what is good about the way we do things. But this lot are not conservatives. They're destroying. They're going to end up destroying the UK and trying to take Europe down with them. So I think it's a ruling cabal that, as I say, has captured control of the political party behind the scene. And in my earlier remarks, I've given something of a potted history of that elite cabal that I think is actually pulling the strings. So it's not conservative at all in the best sense of the word. Anyway, what did the Queen write back? I mean, I waited, and it was very interesting, because I think words do have an effect. And within a week of sending that letter, which I meditated on very deeply, I prayed over it, I reflected on its language, and then finally it came off and I posted it. Within a week of that, Theresa May made her first serious public announcement about what kind of Brexit she was going for. I regard that as a breakthrough. Now, I'm not able to tell you causally, did the Queen get my letter and have a word with Theresa May? It's possible. Did that not happen? Was it just contributing to building an energy in Theresa May's mind that she, is the Queen getting 100 or 200 letters a day like this? I wouldn't be at all surprised. I hope so, because every scholar, every academic who cares about Britain should be writing letters like this, both to the Queen and to the Prime Minister. Let's hope that it was the accumulation of all that finally made Theresa May stand up and say, well, we've thought about this long and hard, and we've decided to go for the softest possible ever Brexit. She should have said that from day one, because what's been happening in the 18 months since the original triggering of her leave process is that because she wasn't clear about what kind of Brexit we're going to have a hard Brexit, everything's completely, all the bridges are torn up and we treat the EU as an enemy country, as some idiots in the Conservative Party seem to be wanting. All or are we going to go for a really soft one where we keep everything as it is, but we just change the logo on the top of the flagpoles? Finally, she comes out with a soft version. Maybe having heard rumblings of this letter, and Boris Johnson and the other extremist Brexiteers, Michael Gove and a few others, resign. Well, I would say long, long overdue. My daughter, who did a summer school at Eton as a potential recruit to Cambridge, she did her degree at Cambridge in English. She was taught by the teacher that taught Boris Johnson and David Cameron at Eton. They're not that intelligent. Boris Johnson is absolutely not only not very intelligent intellectually, but also morally, and this is where I think he's let the country down. He's proved to be a very shallow product of Eton. You know, if you go to Eton, you have to learn morality. You have to learn to tell the difference between right and wrong. That's the bedrock of all education. And if Eton is turning out people like Boris Johnson, it's a crime, actually, because it's a waste of education. These are shallow people that like seaweed, just float with the waves. Anyway, thank God they've gone, long overdue. But I think that's not enough. I think the whole Tory Brexit policy should be utterly reversed, and a second referendum should be ordered. And I think that Theresa May has a moral duty to the nation to realise that is in the interests of Britain, and she should form a coalition government to push it through. The hard right will cry treason, the Daily Mail and the Telegraph will say arrest that woman. If she had the courage of her convictions, and she would sack the entire cabinet and start again with a mixed cabinet, including Liberals and a few other parties that actually want a second referendum. That includes the SNP, the Plaid Cymru in Wales, parties in Northern Ireland, the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party. I think Labour will realise that it's in its interest to call for a second referendum, and that it's acting unconstitutionally and immorally. How can a Labour leader participate in the co-destruction of his own country? I used to teach at Adams Grammar School where Jeremy Corbyn was educated, but the chap got very bad exam results. If he was in my class, if he was doing this as a political science exercise, I would fail him. Jeremy Corbyn needs to go back to school to learn about political ethics. The first rule of a politician is you don't undertake policies that will lead to the destruction of your country. Unless you're a psychopath involved in serious self-harming. And I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is in that category. Although there are a lot of people that are self-harming in Britain, and I think psychologically one of the explanations of Brexit is this mass outbreak of self-harming that's going on, which I, as a medical philosopher, a philosopher of peace, is to me a medical tradition, is a very serious crisis. This is a crisis of self-harming. So anyway, I wrote the letter. There have been a few effects, and this is the reply I had from the Queen, which I want to share with you. And again, it's a public reply. I'm not breaking confidences. It doesn't say top secret over the top. It's got the Buckingham Palace logo, but no top secret. And I'm very grateful to the Queen to have taken the time to read my correspondence and to reply. Thank you, Ma'am. And I hope it has some fruit, right? I'm only sharing, it's very brief. She wrote it on the 7th of August through her deputy correspondence coordinator, a woman called Miss Jenny Vine. And again, it's very interesting the difference between when Buckingham Palace write to you and when the Prime Minister does. When you get letters off the Prime Minister, they're always signed illegibly. The last signature looked like Francesca, but it's impossible to tell. They deliberately withhold the name so that you can't actually correspond to them, which I find a stupid and shocking and trivially ridiculous kind of cloaking of discourse. If we're going to have a serious democracy in Britain and in Europe, which is what I want, going to have a liberal democracy based on freedom of thought, freedom of speech, all the things we take for granted, we need to eyeball each other and have these conversations. We need to be able to talk to each other. And we need to know who's writing to you, So the Queen, I think, is a far more sophisticated stateswoman than these prime ministers. And so she puts a name to her letters. I can write back to this woman and say, thank you very much, etc. Anyway, this is the reply that the correspondence coordinator drafted, but I suspect it was with the approval of the Queen. I've been asked to write back. I've been asked to write and thank you. Sorry, let me start again. 7th of August, dear Dr. Daffern, I've been asked to write and thank you for your letter of 28th June to the Queen, from which careful note has been taken of the views you express regarding the UK's departure from its membership of the European Union. While it was interesting to know of your views, I must explain that as a constitutional sovereign, Her Majesty acts on the advice of her ministers and remains strictly non-political at all times. These are therefore not matters on which the Queen would personally comment. Yours sincerely, the Deputy Correspondence Coordinator. Well, I think that's a masterly letter, and it's in 2 sections. The most important is the first paragraph, and the key phrase is, thank you for your letter, from which careful note has been taken. Now that's all I ask. All I want is that somebody, I don't know, somebody presumably opens these letters and then has a word with somebody who has a word with somebody, and finally maybe has a word with the Queen. I think the phrase careful note has been taken implies that, yes, somebody communicated the contents of my letter to the Queen. And thank God, is all I can say, because I honestly think it's a case of the Emperor's new clothes. I don't think anyone in the Tory cabal, the ruling elites of Britain, I think nobody has been actually pointing out to Her Majesty what's actually going to happen. It's not in the media. You won't find any reference to these consequences, which I know purely because I am a historian and a philosopher, and I've taught all over the UK. I've travelled all over it. I see a much bigger picture than most people, and I'm Canadian anyway, so I see things on a global perspective. I honestly think nobody's pointed this out to her. I'm like the little boy that cries, "Look, the Emperor's got no clothes on," in the Hans Andersen Christian fairy tale. So, well, thank God, maybe somebody's pointed this out to her. And what's very interesting is, within a week of that, a huge sea change, and Theresa May actually says something that has the modicum of common sense about her. The second paragraph is obviously a formal necessity. She has to point out, the Queen, that she's a constitutional monarch. She can't interfere. She has to act on the advice her ministers give her. She can't say to Theresa May, "Theresa, I'm sorry, this whole thing's wrong, you've got to stop Brexit. I've just read Dr. Daffern's letter and I'm shocked and appalled. Why didn't you tell me before that the country was in danger?" She can't say it in that exact language, because Theresa May could get very cross and say, "You have no right to talk to me like that," But there are nuances here. Don't forget that the Queen and the Prime Minister have every week an audience, private discussion. The Queen can absolutely, it's within her rights to point out, "Have you thought this through carefully, Theresa? Do you realise the consequences of this Brexit stuff?" I mean, I know it sounds good on paper, and yes, you can make it look like that's what we have to do, but have you actually thought through the consequences? I think it's within her constitutional right, indeed her duty, to point this out to her Prime Minister. And then, of course, it's the Prime Minister's duty to say, "I'll go away and think about that." And then to get some actual civil servants who've actually got an independent brain working on it. And I think that's what's happening behind the scenes. I'm not claiming that I'm in any way causally responsible, but I might have played a role in it if she's getting other letters like this. And I would like there to be millions of letters like that. I would like all people that care passionately about the UK and its future in Europe, and who care and love about Europe as well, want to keep the EU, but remodel it. Like I said in the beginning of this talk, let's get it that the European Union bureaucrats are paid less than the lowest paid Prime Minister. Let's reassert democracy. The way to do that isn't to pull the UK out It's to bring the UK really into the discussion room and call these bureaucrats to account. It's to have politicians in Britain that care passionately about democracy and genuine liberal values saying enough is enough to these kind of fat cats. So anyway, that's the state of play. And my final point is, why do I bother? So what, Let it happen. It's karma. Britain's hubris. They're going to do Brexit and then fall on their feet. Well, I don't take that view. I'm not a cynic. I'm passionately, a lover of life, a lover of the people of Britain, a lover of the landscape of Britain. I have 3 beautiful daughters that live in England. I love every inch of the United Kingdom. I don't want to see it go through suffering, as is happening already. The economy's collapsed. There's a nasty mood of xenophobia prowling around the streets, and people are in fear, and people are being subject to racial attacks and abuse. That's appalling. That's not the country I know and love. And I will, strain every nerve of my body to prevent that narrative winning out. And I believe the Queen is on the side of rationality, and she, as a Christian, also believes in love as the solution to our problems. Brexit is not coming from love. It's coming from hatred, ignorance, fear, and hubris. That's not love. Staying in Europe, having a second referendum, awakening the people of Britain to vote to stay in Europe and to change it from within for the better. The continent that gave us Beethoven and Goethe and Racine and Aeschylus and Plato, is a continent worth working to transform for the good. And together we can do that. But by just sort of going off and sulking and watching the UK break up, that's a ridiculous project, dreamed up only by people that want to. I think actually at the end of the day they want to exacerbate conflict and violence in the world so they can sell more weapons. I want a Peace Studies Institute in London, at the University of London, to think through these kind of things. I want a nonagon on the Pentagon as a Department of Peace to rethink American foreign policy. I want similar things in Russia and France, so that we think through together a peaceful world. And then we put peace policy at the heart of a reformed European Union. So in Brussels we have like a Department of Peace. We have a European Union mediation service based in Venice whose job is to prevent wars going on in neighbouring countries like in Ukraine or other Mediterranean countries, Syria, wherever. It's not in the European Union's interest to see these wars happening. We need a European Union mediation service that will prevent them. So that's what I want, a reformed Europe, and a Britain that is powerfully in love again with the European project in its reforming ideal. And thank you anyway for listening, and I've shared a few secrets from the philosopher's desk here. I hope you will help get involved. You can join my Patreon channel where I share things in more detail, and generally support the Institute. Join it, get involved, and help me campaign for a world based on justice, reason, truth and love, instead of one world based on fear and war and violence. The choice is very simple. Thank you so much for listening.